recording the session. Okay, we're sharing screen, so we'll wait for a few moments and then we'll start.
Great, we can see there are a lot of attendees coming in now. I think we still have just a couple of minutes before we hit the top of the hour, so we'll just give it a minute and then go ahead and get started. Okay, I think that we may still be adding some additional participants, but we'll go ahead and get started just in the interest of time. We really want to, get through an interesting presentation and set of discussion today, and we definitely want to have time at the end of the session to open up for questions from the audience. Good morning, good afternoon to our colleagues around the globe. Thanks for tuning into this session on digital technology and data-led citizen reporting related to the emergency response around Desert Locust by Mercy Corps, together with PlantVillage and a whole ecosystem of partners that we've been working with for the last 6 months. My name is Lisa Schrader, and I'm the director of the Mercy Corps AgriFin programs. I'll be leading you through, I'll be moderating through to talk with our experts about the program work related to our Desert Locust crisis and response in East Africa. Welcome to the session. So I'm gonna have to be giving some prompts to John Mundy to move the slides for me. So thank you, John. Here's an outline of our agenda for today. First, I'll talk to you about the agenda and a little bit about Mercy Corps AgriFin and our background and how we ended up in this incredibly interesting emergency response environment. And then we'll follow that by presentation from our partner at PlantVillage, and then John Mundy from our team will be talking about the AgriFin response. And we'll have a bit of a discussion following that internally with John and David, and then we'll move it into audience Q&A. So pretty straightforward. I'm Lisa. You can see David Hughes here in the center. Dr. David Hughes is an associate professor of entomology and biology and the co-creator of PlantVillage. And PlantVillage is a research division of Penn State that uses AI, satellites, and teams of young African agricultural specialists to help smallholder farmers cope with climate change and the pests that affect their crops. David has a long and illustrious history and is probably the leader, at least one of the global leaders in this area. We've been really thrilled to be working with him and his team over the course of this emergency response. And then our second presenter is John Mundy, who comes from the Mercy Corps AgriFin team as our country director in Tanzania, but also has really stepped up as our programs Locust, Desert Locust, and COVID digital response manager. His last 6 months have been pretty busy working across our entire region, and he brings about 12 years of experience in social entrepreneurship, international development, and agriculture. He started his career in politics, working on President Obama's campaign, and also has worked with the Farm to Market Alliance at World Food Program, and we were lucky to steal him after his work in Rwanda and Zambia to bring him onto AgriFin. So I will go ahead and tell you a little bit more about AgriFin. AgriFin is not an emergency response program, although it's something I think that Mercy Corps is well known for. Mercy Corps AgriFin programming is basically technology, digital innovation funding from the MasterCard Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Swiss Development Corporation. Essentially what we do is work at the intersection of technology and agriculture for smallholder farmers. The idea being that, that we believe technology can be a game changer in reaching smallholder farmers at scale, and bringing in wide ranges of products, wide ranges of partnerships and partner organizations. We've been working on AgriFin with over 130 partners in Africa for the last 5 years. 1 second, let me shut the door. You guys, I'm on a recording call, thanks. Anyway, so we are currently reaching about 8 million farmers across Africa, working in partnership with our selected organizations, including banks, governments, mobile network operators, tech innovators, and academic institutions like Penn State and PlantVillage. Basically the gist of our programming is to help farmers every day raise their productivity, income, build their resilience. But with the onset of COVID and Desert Locust, we realized that these digital channels that we've been working with our partners to build have become much more critical in an emergency response environment. So with funding from the Skoll Foundation, we were able to pivot very quickly to begin to use those channels in response to the Desert Locust crisis. We're very, very fortunate to have been introduced early on to David Hughes. And go ahead and move it on to the next slide. And we arrived in a brand new arena of how do you use digital services, digital data to make a difference in the kind of crisis that we're facing with Desert Locust in East Africa. And of course, as you guys all know, the governments across the region were front and center in this response, and working in coordination with the United Nations and FAO. And the question was really all about data and data flows and reporting locust and reporting hopper bands. One of the things that we understood early on was a lot of people were crowding into the space, but the most important thing was to make sure that that good data, the right data was flowing into response systems, but also that farmers needed to be made aware of the crisis. There's a lot of panic, a lot of misinformation. And so what we did in our program was to open up channels to a wide range of our partners, including media and the Shamba Shape Up television program, to SMS channels through several partners, call centers through several partners, and also a WhatsApp hotline. We've been working on WhatsApp for business in agriculture, and we look to turn this with, working in partnership with turn.io out of South Africa, to create a Desert Locust hotline for reporting and information. And what was important to us was that this information would flow directly to the government of Kenya and to the FAO to drive their response. One thing that became very clear to us early on in the response was that the locusts were moving north back to Ethiopia. And so this entire schema that you see here of mobilizing information, of educating farmers, of bringing in partners, of setting this thing up, was picked up and moved to Ethiopia, and it became a dual country implementation. So as you can see, there's an extremely important combination of data sets that's happening. So this was far beyond anything that AgriFin had ever done before. As I said, we're very happy to be partnered with PlantVillage and with Dr. Hughes, with David Hughes, who I'd like to introduce as our first presenter. And he can go into this in much greater detail than I can. Thanks very much, David. Go ahead.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Lisa, and also for the great opportunity to be part of such a tremendous effort. So what I want to do, sort of preceding the talk by John, is to give you an insight into our particular efforts at PlantVillage to leverage the crowd, empowering the crowd with technology to track the desert locust. So 2020 is a year that has given us many significant challenges. So desert locusts are really something that have been boiling up over the last 2 years and really coming to a head because of an intersection of climate change and regional conflict. So these are insects which normally cover about 20% of the world's land surface. It's a single insect species that exists from Mauritania to northern India, and it occurs in desert environments, as the name suggests, and typically as a solitary, non-problematic pest, grasshopper. But it becomes a pest when large amounts of moisture come into the system, leading to rapid explosion of vegetation. And in those cases, the populations build up in huge numbers. And huge are billions and billions of insects, which can eat as much food as a city such as Nairobi in a single day. And for smallholder farmers or pastoralists, this is a tremendous challenge and an absolute huge emergency that they have to respond to. And so these videos show you the extent of the problem. In the top, we have yellow locusts, which are the reproducing stage on Lake Turkana back in January. The video on the left is hopper bands moving up a tree. These are the flightless stages. And on the bottom is an enormous swarm sweeping over hills in Isiolo County in Kenya. And this would be terrifying to farmers and pastoralists who are waking up in the morning to encounter billions of locusts which are just going to destroy their crops. So as Lisa said, this is a truly terrifying situation and something that we necessarily must respond to. Now, the traditional way in which we see a response is through the UN FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN. And they've had the mandate for monitoring and organizing the control of locusts over the last 70 years in conjunction with country partners. And this is through the deployment of technology and experts in the field. And the map here shows the distribution of this insect species from West Africa to India, 20% of the world's land surface. And it shows 26,000 records that were collected by FAO between 1985 and 2019 by dedicated field officers. And what you notice is the wide distribution, but you also notice that Kenya did not have any major incursions. There's a few slight examples here from 2007, but generally it's a country which has not seen desert locusts and in fact hasn't seen a major upsurge since 1957. In October 2019, 18th of October 2019, it was predicted that locusts would move with the winds from the Ogaden in Ethiopia across the border into Kenya. And this is what happened on the 28th of December. And then they rapidly spread across about 26 counties. And this led to widespread panic. These are some news reports at the time, sort of claiming gloom and doom about the impending catastrophe which these locusts were purported to bring about. And this is really speaking to Lisa's point of the urgency of the situation and the necessity of responding rapidly. You'll notice the dates here on some of these news reports from early in 2020. This coincided with the declaration of the COVID-19 pandemic by WHO. which had an effect of shutting down travel between counties in Kenya. So essentially, locusts were a crisis within a crisis, and a tremendously difficult thing for the country of Kenya to respond to. Predominantly because it was not a frontline country. It wasn't a country that historically had locusts, and therefore did not historically have locust observation teams which would go out and do this really important surveillance. Locusts are very much like COVID in the sense that you can't fight a fire blindfolded, as the WHO director mentioned about COVID. You cannot control locusts unless you know where they are. So PlantVillage was an official UN partner at the time. We had worked on transboundary pest issues with UNFAO, particularly fall armyworm, but also red palm weevil. And we were asked to produce an app which would be enabling non-experts to conduct desert locust surveillance. And in addition, we also deployed locust crisis teams for FAO. So on the left-hand side is a traditional model. You have experts who would travel in remote locations with four-wheel drive vehicles and with tools that enable satellite connection in order to make observations in remote locations. The situation that we proposed was larger number of individuals gathered from local communities and then just traveling around the areas with motorbikes, as you can see on the right-hand side. And these individuals, these are the PlantVillage teams, but also individuals who worked outside of PlantVillage, they would work for the government, for example. These individuals have just a standard smartphone. And Frank Doyle on our team developed this really excellent app, which was able to work offline, so critically making an observation of the presence of locusts in areas. But the most important thing of the app was its ability to connect directly to satellites. So this was something that the FAO would have, and you can see this on the top of the four-wheel drive vehicle. And we obviated the need for this expensive, dedicated technology by modifying the ability of smartphones to connect to GPS satellites. And so this was really important because there are a lot more smartphones in northern Kenya than there are FAO vehicles driving around. So this enabled us to open it to a wider range of individuals who could then do surveillance with us and for us. Now, in order to do surveillance, you need to know which type of locust you're looking at, and you need to be able to record that accurately. And this is really, really critical information because we need to know this in order to predict what's going to happen next. Locusts go through these multiple stages, and it's critically important to know which stage is which and where it is. Now, one way in which we could do this is have a deep domain expert like Keith Cressman, who's a senior locust forecaster at FAO with a 30-year history of doing this. And he's been training many individuals at headquarters in Rome who would then go back into these frontline countries. But that's a slow, laborious process, which is rate limited by his ability to train other people. So we took an approach whereby we would provide these scouts like Tyson, who's a PlantVillage team member, taking a really wonderful selfie here with a locust. We would provide these scouts with detailed information on the stages so they could learn what they were when they were trying to collect the data, and we would reduce the errors in the system. We're going a little bit further than this. So this is work by Pete and Rohit on the PlantVillage team. Because with this app has been used so widely from Kenya all the way to Nepal, we've collected over 100,000 images. And on the back end in our platform, what we're doing is using machine learning to enable artificial intelligence computer vision. So as the locust image is uploaded, we're automatically classifying it as a locust, and now actually moving further than that to be able to classify it at a particular stage. So here's an example where technology is able to reduce the errors of individuals who are working within the crowd who don't necessarily have the training of FAO, but technology allows them to get up to a level which is comparable. So this is really a good move forward. Now, while the app itself was important and the ability to enable better data collection by individuals with minimal training, we also found back in March and April that the use of the app wasn't happening organically. We really needed to push it. So PlantVillage for over a year has been working in Kenya, developing this approach of a dream team model, where we hire young people from universities, and these are them. There are 12 excellent young people from Moi University, led by Dr. John Chalal, who is a professor at Moi University. And these individuals go out and work within communities, delivering smartphones which have AI capability to help them diagnose crop diseases in the field, as well as an associated SMS system. So we built in this community structure, working with farmers, large groups of individual lead farmers here to improve the capacity. So this was our pre-existing model before the Locust crisis came along. And so we sort of modified that in order to respond rapidly. And this is an example of this Locust crisis team. So this one is from Isiolo County. We eventually got to 62 members across 4 counties. And what they would do is they would work as a team. They would have smartphones, they would go out on those motorbikes, and they would travel to remote locations, quite often locations where four-wheel drive vehicles just couldn't get. They would record the presence of the locust and the stage. Critically important in northern Kenya was the inclusion of local communities. This is dominated by pastoralism. So these were members of the communities, and they would talk to local pastoralists in order to triangulate and figure out where the locusts were. And that was critically important. You can see that here and also here. Fording rivers, collecting reports, putting up paper notifications, distributing information, everything to improve the net by which we can gather observations on locusts. And then finally, working in real time with the locust control planes by FAO to coordinate spraying. So we went from a position of having very few observations, very slow turnaround, to be able to relay in effectively real time the location of locusts to the spray planes, enabling the effective control. This is really a phenomenal change for a country which really hadn't experienced locust, as I mentioned, and really didn't have the capacity to deal effectively. And they really did deal effectively. It was really quite exciting to see. In addition to bringing together a crowd of observers, we also worked hard to bring together a crowd of scientists. So we worked very effectively with scientists at NASA and NOAA, also at ISRIC, Grow and Tell, individuals who had expertise in Earth observations. And we worked with these individuals through the data platform that we built and put up online in order to try to understand what is driving the dynamics, the flight dynamics of locusts, and how we might build models and prepare for their eventual movement into different locations. And you'll notice that I began talking about how we had about 26,000 observations. Since March, we've almost got 16,000 observations. So this crowd approach is really accelerating the data that's coming in, and it's actually high quality data, which allows for better modeling and mapping. Some of that modeling and mapping has been led by Fei Zhang and Derek Moore at PlantVillage. And so what they have been doing is integrating multiple sources of information, soil types, the soil moisture data from NASA, lat-long, weather, historical records, and crop growth. And during the peak of the problem in April, May, and June, they were able to predict the occurrence of locusts with a very, very high accuracy across Kenya, really showing the strength of this crowd observation system that we had developed. In addition, what we did was develop maps which went out to, these maps went out to 6 million people through Shamba ShapeUp, and John will talk more about that later on. So another function of our approach. And we're not stopping there. So we're developing technology solutions, AI, satellite-directed mapping, but also we're using telemetry and these little recorders that we now stick on locusts in order to track them across. And this is some work that we were doing last week. This is Edward and Mello on the team, working with local team members, but also with pastoralists in order to see if we can improve the efficiency and accuracy by which we track locusts across the region. So in conclusion, technology, the speed of technology, the ability to technology, the technology that we're now using through Zoom to speak across the world, that technology can allow smallholders and pastoralists and local community members to to achieve a level that is comparable with professionals at FAO. And this is extraordinary. And it's extraordinary because the crowd is bigger, cheaper, and in more places. This really shows how we can have a game-changing approach. And there are many, many ways, and I haven't mentioned the TV in detail, or SMS and the WhatsApp for Business, and this will be something that John will mention in the next talk. And I think it's important to look at this lesson and really not let a good crisis go to waste. We managed very successfully to respond as this ecosystem of individuals, as Lisa mentions, and we want to make sure that we learn from this and also extend it to other problems. So 2020 is that horrible year that keeps on throwing challenges at us, and unfortunately it's a year that's not yet done. This is the report that came out last week from FuseNet talking about catastrophic drought conditions that we're expecting by the end of 2020 across the region. So as these communities are coming out of the stresses of both COVID and Locust, they're now looking down the barrel of a climate change stress in the form of drought. And the sort of activities that we've been able to push forward, leveraging the crowd, enabling a crowd approaches, and taking advantage of this ecosystem that Lisa so precisely mentions, is critically important for our ability to deal with this problem and other problems that are associated with climate change. So before handing over to John, I just wanted to mention, I mentioned a number of people already, critically important are Meladine, Dr. John Chalal, and Annalise, who's the Executive Director of PlantVillage, and then the 62 team members across these 4 counties, really, really excellent individuals who've done a tremendous job. More broadly, the PlantVillage Stream Team, our technology partners, Hoodies, Mercy Corps Media Company, Turn.io that Lisa mentioned, FAO World Food Programme and the government of Kenya have been instrumental in support for this. And of course, an enormous shout out goes to the funders, Skoll Foundation for their rapid response, and Schmidt Futures for having invested in us early on to develop climate change solutions for smallholder farmers in Africa, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for really pushing forward excellence in surveillance, and particularly Christina Owen at the foundation, who's really advocated strongly for this approach. So I really appreciate those partners. And with that, I'll hand over to John. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Just setting up my slide share. Okay, thank you so much, David, for all of that. It's been an amazing collaboration for the last 6 months with you and PlantVillage. What I'm going to talk about a little bit is the digital technologies in detail, slightly avoiding some of the topics David just mentioned, but acknowledging that they've been a big part of the reporting solution, especially the eLocust 3M app. What we've done as AgriFin is we've tried to bring the full force of all of our digital partners together in Kenya and Ethiopia across pretty much every above the line marketing and media channel available, and every digital channel available to make farming communities part of the solution, as well as informing the general public. So what we've done is we've supported an organization called Mediae and their sister company iShamba, and in Ethiopia over 5 regional TV stations along with radio stations, with Kabi supporting and the Agricultural Transformation Agency. And we've been developing content and messages that inform farmers about what desert locusts are primarily, and then enables them through a call to action to report the sightings of locusts. We've also got a lot of resources on these channels about COVID-19, because we are aware that through a new channel of 8 million farming households, that information is also critical with these overlapping crises at the moment. Just to acknowledge that not all rural communities have access to all of the digital channels available. Although in Kenya, we're seeing 90% mobile phone penetration rates, around 30 to 40% approximately smartphone usage closer to urban areas. So digital means do provide an opportunity to reach farmers in new ways. But we are also including large-scale TV and radio shows similar to the content that David played earlier. So this is an example of, I think, David played a video of the Shamba Shape Up TV show. The idea of this show was really to inform the general public about what desert locusts were. At the time in February and March, we really thought that the desert locust would invade all of the farming communities of Kenya, and there was no one better placed than Mediae and the Shamba Shape Up TV show, which has been ongoing for many years, to broadcast quickly new information regarding this threat. They published weekly updates of the map showing where locusts are, which farmers responded well to. But also one of the main and most critical roles of these TV and radio advertisements were to mobilize a call to action around WhatsApp, SMS, and call center reporting. So the Shamba Shape Up hotline over WhatsApp on the left here is an emergency hotline essentially on WhatsApp that's highly programmable. You can change the content in real time because of this Turn.io WhatsApp for Business system. You can update maps anytime you like, but WhatsApp also enables photo sharing so that David and his team can feed the machine learning environment so that that can recognize good reports versus bad reports. It can hold vast amounts of photo information, which is essential, but you can also do pin locations on WhatsApp. And our hypothesis was if some farming communities and farmers were used to using WhatsApp, it was a lower barrier to entry for them to report the locust challenge or access the information than them downloading a new application if they were a smartphone user. However, acknowledging that most of the communities, especially in the northern parts of Kenya, are not predominantly smartphone users, iShamba was also running a shortcode 2160606 where you could text Locust and the sighting and the nearest primary school. Now, not all of this data was as accurate as an eLocust 3M application, but this really allowed farmers and pastoralists and rural communities to report sightings. And what iShamba did with that information was they would often use their call center team, who were highly trained, and David also provided support and training to them to follow up on positive yes reports or vague or difficult to interpret information about locust sighting reports, and then also fed that into the same data environment, which had a measure of validity and quality control in the follow-up. Now, speaking to Ethiopia quickly, we've essentially copy and pasted the same techniques, digital and channels to Ethiopia, but through a different partner, the Agricultural Transformation Agency of Ethiopia, which is the leading innovation hub of the Ministry of Agriculture in Ethiopia. Mercy Corps Ethiopia also supported with the WhatsApp line. We translated all of the materials from Kenya into 5 different languages. One of the key differences in Ethiopia has been the ATA had the 8028 service, which had for a long time already been used for SMS and IVR surveying of district advisors across the country. We also layered on top of this the functionality of WhatsApp. eLocust 3M was also made available to these field agents. And so far, we've, on a weekly basis, had about 2,000 responses on SMS and IVR alone, not including WhatsApp and the eLocust 3M applications, which have just been launched in the last few weeks. ATA has a base of 5 million farmers that are also accessing content on TV and radio to help inform them of the locust threat. So overall, very similar methodology and including all the various channels, but slightly different stakeholders. So I just wanted to end really quickly with my takeaways of all of these digital channels that we've deployed. There's a lot of debates about which channel is best for reporting, and I think the scientific community might say, you know, we need hyper accurate and very detailed information about the type of locust, the maturity, the exact location, etc. And that certainly is the most important for valid reports. But there's also no wrong channel for communities when they're both absorbing content about this threat and to report it on an active basis. We've seen a very interesting interaction between, for example, SMS reports used to regionalize the data, and then that can be used to help government and FAO field operatives to localize their search for locusts in a more meaningful way. So even less valid data sets have an important use in the targeting effort. Secondly, I would say that all of these citizen reporting channels are only as good as the feedback that's provided to the farmers about the action that will be taken because of their reporting. So for example, in the TV shows, we were saying that the mapping effort was really helping the control effort from FAO control planes to control the locust outbreaks. But also farmers were seeing weekly that the maps were changing based on the data that they were providing. And I think this is really important, that most people will not report just for reporting's sake. I mean, some will do, but to get an increase in reports from the field, you really need to show that there's action behind those reports in a citizen reporting digital effort like this. We're still in the very early days of using SMS, interactive voice response, IVR, WhatsApp, and Facebook groups as well, which I haven't spoken to much, but basically all of these channels have been used in various ways for sure, but for citizen reporting, it's still very new. It's very early days. Locust, wheat rust in Ethiopia has had experience with SMS, but we're still experimenting, and we need to experiment with these digital channels on different pests and outbreaks and emergencies as they arise. Early data sharing system setup has been essential. Expectation setting between the partnerships has been essential to be able to translate the collaboration, the digital innovation into practice and real data that David can use for the mapping effort. In a world of climate change, I think David spoke to this and we'll speak to this more in the discussion, but these farming communities really are on the front line of these pests and disease outbreaks, but also flooding and other issues. During the locust outbreak in northern Kenya, we had heavy flooding in the last a few months ago. This prevented field teams accessing those rural communities and these reporting efforts were essential as they were blocked from local infrastructure, etc. So really that's a case of, in the future, climate change will and is now affecting these communities. They're on the front line, so we need to empower them to be able to have the information to respond, but also have that data feeding back into the system effectively so we can respond on our end as well. So with that, I'll move to Lisa for some discussion questions.
Great, thank you, John and David. Really appreciate those presentations. I can't believe you covered so much ground in such a short period of time. Gives us a lot of time for questions. So I'm going to kick things off with just 3 high-level questions, but that 4th block you'll see down there is for the audience. And really just encouraging you, if you have questions for David or John, to include them. And John, if you could go up one more, where did the questions go? There we go. Okay, so please do send your questions through in the chat and we will incorporate them. And I'll kick off this discussion just asking David and John to comment about, just a bit further in more detail about what we've learned about leveraging digital technology in an emergency response. I think when we first started talking with the Skoll Foundation about kicking this off, it was such new territory. How can we make this work? So what have you guys learned? What have been your major takeaways about leveraging digital technology in an emergency response environment?
I suppose I can start there, John. So the primary thing that we learned is that the capacity of communities local communities to embrace this, whether it's farmers or pastoralists, communities in extremely resource poor settings. Samburu County in Kenya, 78% of the local community is on less than $1.70 a day, so extraordinarily poor. Their ability to use this technology, embrace the technology, and be part of that broader network, either through SMS or engaging with the community members who have these smartphones with eLocust 3M, was easy. So that's not the rate limiting step. The rate limiting step is whether we want to design these tools intelligently for the work at hand. And as John has said, it's really, really beneficial to be able to deploy them both for observation, but also importantly for disseminating information. So it really is that traditional win-win, that we can help people get information, but at the same time pull back it. Technology itself is not the rate limiting step. Uber has transformed the ride-sharing community globally. Individuals used to practice for years to be a taxi driver. It used to be very difficult to get in, but now a 16-minute video on YouTube and a smartphone enables you to become a taxi driver. And so we've seen this in the North, so why shouldn't it be the situation in the global South? And I think what we've demonstrated over the last few months as this team, as this broad ecosystem, is that we can absolutely do it. And there's definitely no going back from here.
And David, let me just follow up really quickly to what you had said. There was a question from Sensibe Elemu. Is this tech platform that you've built, can it do more? Can it collect more than just data on desert locust? I just thought, since we're talking about the tech, maybe you could address that one right now.
Yes, absolutely. So PlantVillage is a partner with a Gates-funded project called WAVE, West African Viral Epidemiology, where we're working across 10 countries. It's a partner with UNFAO for the fall armyworm. We're working across 60 countries and 29 languages. It's also partnered with FAO for red palm weevil. So we're quite agnostic to the transboundary pest, and having built a platform, we will then extend it to other issues and problems. Absolutely, it's used for lots of different things.
Great. Okay. All right. Then I'll move over to John. And John, what are your top of mind thoughts about what we've learned about leveraging digital tech in an emergency response?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about AgriFin, as you said at the beginning, is not a emergency response program. So a lot of our work in digital technology is often through a partner who has interest in developing a digital product for farmers, right? And we often start with what is the right digital product for those farmers, or what are the needs that those farmers have, a specific, and matching that technology to that specific need. In this case, we've gone with every technology available pretty much within the digital information space. And I think the key lesson here has been that there's, again, as kind of my first takeaway was, there's no wrong technology. And the reason I say that is because we're looking at a highly scalable, rapid response across millions of people in rural areas. And some farmers and pastoralists might not be literate. They might not have a smartphone, so you need IVR. If farmers have a smartphone, then you need WhatsApp plus Locust 3M. If you have none of those things, we've used radio, etc. So I think there's been less in an emergency response of what we would normally do, where we would shape a digital technology solution around a product need with a partner. And this has really been a mass market, as you will, response to the very rapidly developing crisis.
John, there was a question from the audience about which digital channels did we have the best engagement on?
That's a really good question, and it's still something we're learning about. And actually, between countries, it varies a lot as well. So in Kenya, we saw at the beginning, we had some promising early reports on SMS, some low uptake on WhatsApp, and then the best response from call center follow-up. So it was really a multifaceted uptake. It's still slightly slow on the WhatsApp side. We think it's partially due to the regions where locusts are, partially due to some design aspects that we're currently learning from now. In Ethiopia, we've seen a very quick uptake in SMS and IVR reports with trained district advisors under ATA. And we're seeing very early and very quick uptake of WhatsApp as well, partly because these are trained field staff. So I think the answer to that question is going to become more and more obvious over the next few months. And it's really country specific based on the digital infrastructures that's there in place.
Great. There was a question from the audience about whether the ATA service covers the entire country, and I know we have Elias Noor from our team, but the liftoff in Ethiopia has been relatively recent. But maybe John, you can speak to the coverage of the service in Ethiopia at this time.
Yeah, so we've translated into 5 languages and 5 major regions. I won't list them here, but the majority of the country is covered. However, we're also working with ATA to target specific regions where we know locusts were predicted to be, and FAO and David and his team have highlighted the areas where ATA needs to concentrate on.
Okay, and I'm just sifting through several questions from the audience. Thanks, you guys. Keep them coming. So what I'll do is while I'm sifting through that, I'll ask this next question from our list of what have we learned about building the partnerships that it takes to work across countries, languages, context, and digital environments. So what, this whole adventure has been an adventure in partnerships for scale. So what would you guys say that we've learned about partnerships here? And David, since you were a massive partnership driver for us, maybe we'll start with you.
I think the two takeaway messages for me are domain expertise and philosophy. So what I found wonderful with what we've been able to do is that AgriFin and Medii and Shama ShapeUp and ourselves, none of us had overreach into the other area of expertise. So we don't do TV programs and we don't build the ecosystem of services that AgriFin did. And that allowed us to each focus on our expertise, our area of interest, where we could actually make the big difference. And then there was an enormous synergism across those. So I thought it was really, really excellent that we didn't conflict with each other, but we just complemented at every step of the way. And the other is the philosophy, this idea that if we're going to do something impactful, it has to be mindful of the individuals on the ground, the pastoralists, the farmers, and building solutions for them. As John very nicely put, we were sort of agnostic to what tool could work, and we're still agnostic. We're still kind of exploring that space. And whatever works for local communities, counties, or countries, that's what we're ultimately going to go with. So I think that was a really important lesson that we took away from this.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I think one of the fundamentals has been really the basics of coordination and project management. It sounds really boring, but we found, I think, especially when you're dealing with quite complex issues, complex data sets, remote working for the first time across all of this with COVID-19, having more communication rather than less between partners, having some really clear expectations at the beginning, and then really fundamentally working out at the beginning what the data sharing protocols were and are. This is all about extracting data from the field and rural communities, but also providing it back to them in a way that quickly responds to their questions. And so if you don't have all of these channels open at the beginning, and all of these data sharing systems and project management fundamentals set up, then it would be very hard to do it without that between partners.
Yeah, and I would just like to make a massive call out here about the movement of the government of Kenya and the government of Ethiopia. Frankly, it was incredible how quickly this all kind of came together. And I remember how important it was, and the World Bank was involved. I mean, it was new technology. There were a lot of concerns about citizen reporting and citizens' actual privacy of their own data, and how we were going to protect farmers who were reporting, especially if they were giving things like location data. These were big questions that we had to confront early on in the system as we were trying to deal with this. And I remember we were just back and forth, and obviously David Hughes and the PlantVillage team had a lot of this was not their first rodeo. They had understood a lot of how we could respond to this and how the data systems could protect the farmers. But ultimately, in a matter of a couple of weeks in Kenya, PS Boga from the Ministry of Agriculture said, we want to make the farmers part of the solution. We want to put them in the middle of this crisis and let them be part of taking care of it. And the same thing in the ministry, in Ethiopia. Once we realized how important it was going to be in Ethiopia, it was quite remarkable. how quickly players came together. So the government did have to be a part of this. There's really no way to do this kind of emergency response without integrating into government responses and adding value. I think that was what a lot of people were asking us was, okay, lots of people want to respond in desert locust. How are you adding value here? And this is something that I think is kind of coming to the fore. There were a couple of questions from the audience, and I'm kind of grouping them a little bit. A couple of the questions really had to do with locusts themselves and this desert locust challenge. So basically what I'm going to kind of combine two questions. One of them says, when you're dealing with the desert locust threat, what are the key challenges that you faced? And do you see actors really, the stakeholders really being able to take action against this information that's coming in? And another question kind of related to that was, can the platform help detect locust early enough, like before breeding or during breeding? Can they help detect locust early enough to drive response? So I don't know, David, if you want to take those two. What are the key challenges that we're facing in dealing with desert locust? Are the actors, stakeholders really able to take action on this data? And and how early can we be using this kind of a process to detect locust and respond?
Yeah, so on the second question, early detection, absolutely. We were able to use, with a really excellent partnership with NASA, 2-week forecast on the soil moisture, and then work by Fei Zhang and her team with the soil databases. So we knew where the likely areas for breeding would be. So locusts prefer to breed in sandy soils, so we could predict that. And also just collecting observations, we could predict where they were going to be, the hoppers, etc. So we can really predict with high accuracy. The greater problem is that we oftentimes don't know what we don't know. And so in Kenya, in certain counties like Wajir, Mandera, we weren't able to access it because of local conflicts and issues around that. And so we weren't able to go there. And this was also a question raised by one of our colleagues from Ethiopia around certain regions, and Ethiopia had an issue with the internet shutdown. So we weren't able to do observations there. And this really does speak to John's point about a modality of inputs. We shouldn't just rely upon one. So oftentimes we're not able to effectively respond because we don't know where they are. We need more surveillance. It's really, really critical, very much like COVID.
Okay, great. We're getting a lot of really good questions online. Let's see, let me move to this one. We know that climate, and this one's kind of related to a couple of the questions that have come in. We know that climate-related shocks and emergencies are going to continue to impact farmers across Africa. In fact, we know that, we haven't, the desert locust threat is not past. It is going to continue. How can we prepare ourselves to be nimble and effective in the future? And there was a question from the audience of, will emergency response, such as actions described, always rely on public good funding? Is it feasible for governments to invest in systems that can respond without external support? So I guess that's a little bundle of questions for you guys. We know this is going to continue to be necessary, probably on a growing scale. How can we prepare ourselves to be nimble and effective in the future? And are there ways that we can establish this where African governments, where all governments, I mean, look what's happening, all over the world, can be funding ongoing emergency response programming? Who wants to take that one? David, go for it.
Sure. I think that the nimbleness and effectiveness is driven by technology. Again, look at Uber. You could train for years to be a taxi driver, or you could just do it anytime you wanted for a few hours a day. You can do that now because of the phone as an Uber driver. And we can use technology cheaply, effectively to rapidly mobilize a crowd. And then when the problem dissipates in an area, we can move to another area. And so also to Danny's point, it could enable local ownership and payment by countries if it's extraordinarily cheap. And smartphones are there, they're cheap, these tools are effective. Building a platform for desert locusts and then transposing it to cassava diseases or rust or climate change or abiotic stress, it reduces the costs overall. So I do believe we can come out of this with a very effective, high quality surveillance system that is cost effective and can be sustained through time.
Yeah, I would just add.
Okay, great. Sorry. Go ahead, John. Would you want to respond as well? Sorry, my internet suddenly is patchy, of course. Oh,
I think
go
this
ahead.
question could take us to another hour of this webinar, but yeah, I think David's point is absolutely correct, but I want to highlight that in climate change you have both a very fast-moving set of crises and a very slow-moving set of crises and solutions. So if you're looking at how digital climate smart agriculture can be part of the solution, you've got a whole ecosystem of innovators, especially in East Africa at the moment, who have amazing technologies, from solar irrigation solution at Sun Culture, or digital financial services at DigiFarm, etc., that can be adapted to help farmers build resilience in the face of climate change. So that we're not always relying on quick emergency response solutions like the citizen reporting effort. However, as we know, locusts, for example, are not going away either. And we need to have these solutions on standby to deploy when there are emergencies, where, as David likes to say, when there's a fire, you call the fire service, you don't try and solve it yourself. And those solutions need to be on hand and easily deployed at very short notice to support when there's a pest outbreak or a flooding emergency or a drought, etc. And there's a whole suite of digital tools and innovators working on that, and that's primarily why we've worked through partnerships on this effort, but I think it's going to be a much longer term effort as well.
Yeah, I think that, like I said at the beginning, we've worked with, I just counted them yesterday, about 135 partners across Africa to develop digital services. I'd say, looking at this crisis, the double crisis of desert locust and COVID, I'd say maybe 30% of them were able to mobilize and respond. And these were all digital. The 70% of them were struck dumb, basically, by the lack of information, by the lack of stability in markets, by the freezing of the commercial banks and the freezing of cash flow, the freezing of transportation. So 70% of the organizations that we work with have had to scale back what we do, while 30% were able to really forge ahead and grow. And I think that, moving forward in our environment with climate-related shocks and emergencies becoming more common, we need to equip every organization that we work with climate-smart approaches and tools that are ready to go. This stuff is not easy to dream up at the moment of the emergency, and they need to be, I think we do need to be preparing a wide range of partners to deploy these types of solutions and massage them into everything that they do. Okay, so we've got some questions. Looks like we've got about 5 minutes left. There's a packet of questions around data, of course. There were some, big questions, huge questions like that probably I should just ask David to link into this particular person, because there were 5 questions about how can we increase access of data for everyone? How can we use machine learning, to predict, to be more predictive? There are also questions about data ownership and how we handle data ownership, alternative uses, and informed consent, especially around crowdsourced data and data collected by staff. So, I guess there's 2 questions there. How can we expand the access of this data to a wider range of organizations, and how we can use machine learning to be more predictive? And then also, how do we handle data ownership? I can speak to a certain extent, from us at Mercy Corps, one of the ways, probably the most important way that we were able to join into the party was to say that Mercy Corps kept none of this data, absolutely none of it. It was, the systems that we set up were direct systems to share data with the proper authorities, with authorized parties, with the authority to respond. And from our perspective, that was not our role, was to hold data. Our role was to make sure that a lot more data, and the farmers were educated and a lot more data was flowing. And we did not see it, and we did not keep it. But maybe I'll just go ahead and kick these questions of data, machine learning, data ownership back to our esteemed panelists. How would you guys want to respond on that.
So I can take a stab. So it's a fallacy to think that we need to own the data to help in a digital ecosystem. That's because we live in a surveillance capitalist society where people make money out of selling data. We don't need any personal identifiable data. We didn't take any. We worked with partners like iShamba who had telephone numbers, but we don't need that. They have a trust relationship with their group and we simply don't take them. And that's an easy problem to solve because it's not actually important to diagnosing where the locusts are. In terms of an informed consent, since we're not collecting personally identifiable information, we don't need informed consent. It's well understood that locusts being a transboundary pest, the data is a public good. It's available on Locust Hub. We have it as well. People can use that in order to do predictions. And on the question of machine learning and predictions, it's really, really effective. All our outputs are available to the community. We're working with that consortia at NASA and NOAA and NASA Harvest in order to make sure all of this is out there, enabling people to make better predictions. But not just us, also ICIPE have been doing a really excellent job in this space as well. So these are important issues to raise, and we found in our experience over the last 7 months are absolutely not blockers in the efforts that we put forward.
Okay, great. I think we've just got time for one more quick question, and then thanks to, I think it's quick. There were a couple of questions around whether or not these types of tools and approaches can be used in sort of post-disaster reporting. So there was a question about could data-led citizen reporting be helpful in estimating and quantifying loss in livelihoods and biodiversity, to help us with timely and properly targeted interventions. Anyone want to take that one on? So basically the flip side of the coin. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I would say a big maybe, partly because to really understand the impacts of these sorts of crises, you do need slightly more advanced surveys and on the ground presence, and to make sure that you've got an accurate picture of that. This can inform part of citizen reporting, can inform kind of generalistic information about where has been most impacted, but you won't necessarily get data on, whose incomes have been worst affected by this issue, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where FAO and government really do step in on the data gathering side.
I think that this is an area, for pushing the boundaries of tools like like eLocust, to, as David had originally said, to professionalize, the people who are out in the field, and to use technologies to raise the level and the validity of the observations that they're making in the field. One of the areas that we've been talking to several players about is if we can use these tools to better understand devastation levels and to target conditional/unconditional cash transfers back into these areas as they're trying to rebuild. And this is something I think is possible in this context when you have this richer data environment, but complex against different actors. We are officially out of time now, so I just want to thank so much David Hughes and the team at PlantVillage for the incredible work. Right off the blocks is an amazing agile response building on incredible expertise and networks, and thanking all of our partners, particularly our partners in the Kenyan government, the Ethiopian government, Agricultural Transformation Agency of Ethiopia, definitely MEDI, and the Shampa Shape Up team, and everything that they've done. Huge thanks to John Mundy from our team for stepping up and stepping way beyond the call of duty to lead all of this, and he also leads our COVID work. And a gigantic thanks to the Skoll Foundation. I think this was the first time that Skoll had waded into the territory of emergency response, and they were fast, they were smart, they were responsive, and we're extremely grateful and hope that we can build on this, to move these systems forward in the future. So thank you guys for attending, and we will share out the presentation deck. If you would like to see it, we'll figure out how to be back in touch with you and share it across. Please feel free to reach out and be in touch with us. And thanks for joining.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you.